Today's guest is Brint Hlavaty, who is just a fascinating pilot. Really started as a mechanical engineer, worked in the oil fields, and then wound up a pilot. He's worked for NetJets, flying private jets. Now he's at Southwest. We talked all through his story on how he went from mechanical engineering and the oil fields to flying private jets to then working for Southwest. It was just a fascinating podcast. If you have any interest in aviation, flying, or just want to hear some fun stories, this is definitely a podcast for you.
So glad I have no responsibility with the technology.
All right, we're good.
The lights wouldn't come on.
All right, sorry about that. Oh, we were technically not recording.
So we just start over?
Yeah, I'll kick us over. So, Brent, thank you for hopping on today, coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, I feel like pilots are very much like home builders in the sense that they have some weird story on how they got into it. There's not like a super direct path to go being a pilot. Maybe there is now, tell me about it. But I'm just fascinated. What's your story? Why do you fly planes?
Yeah, so as a kid, we lived on a 6,000 acre farm out in West Texas, and we had airplanes crop dust in the fields all the time. And so, I would run outside. It was my dad's cousin would fly over to the house. So he was our crop duster, and he would, give us a real special buzz every single time. So I'd wake up at 6 a.m., run out there in my underwear with with the towel wrapped around my safety pinned around my neck, looking like a cape, like Superman, and my Superman undies, run out there and watch him.
I still do that,
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. But so I'd run out there and watch him just buzz the house. I probably ingested all kinds of chemicals and stuff that he was spraying, but I was having so much fun watching it. It was amazing. And so it was kind of always in the back of my mind. And then I had an uncle. We lived in Lubbock near Reese Air Force Base, where there was a Air Force training base out there. And so two of my aunts ended up meeting and falling in love with pilots out there in the Air Force, and they ended up becoming airline pilots. So that kind of sparked it as well. And then in high school, I was playing football under Friday Night Lights and everything, right?
You grew up in Lubbock, right? So it's all Lubbock, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, in Lubbock. So playing football, and I was real excited about my senior year, and then turned around and blew up my knee the last day of two-a-days my senior year of football, and thought my life was over. I was being kind of a little turd head sitting at home, moping around, and my mom was just like, let's go get you your first lesson. And so we went down to a local, a small airport called Town and Country Airport, little crop duster field out there. And I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Seth Ballinger, and he ended up taking me on my first flight in 7297 Juliet. And
wow.
It was a little Piper Cherokee 140 with a 160 horsepower engine on it.
So you were a senior in high school at this time?
Senior in high school, yeah. And so then I took my first lesson and really fell in love with it. And then my high school had a program called, or a senior project basically, to where we had to learn a new skill.
Okay.
And so we turned around, and I was just like, hey, why don't I just learn how to fly? So I asked my teachers, and I was like, was this okay? And they were like, well, yeah, that's fine. That's what the point of this whole thing was. And so I ended up, writing papers and doing all that, and doing my entire flight training from, in October, and then I ended up in July of that year getting my pilot license.
Wow. So were you able, through that program at your school, I didn't realize schools had that type of thing. That's really cool. I mean, so were you able to do like class time in an airplane, or how'd that work?
Well, so you could work on your project during class time. They had an allotted period of time for your senior project, and it allowed towards classwork. But I wasn't able to actually go and leave and do the flight training then. So I had to do that all on my own after school, or on the weekends, or in the mornings before school. So we just kind of watched the weather, and just I worked with my dad and put in a lot of hours changing water at 6 a.m. in the morning, and pulling weeds, and driving tractors and stuff, and paying for my pilot license or that. So just kind of drug it out, but paid for it as I went. So
pilot license your senior year, and then from there, what'd you do?
So from right after I got my pilot license, I was that was my senior year, so I was going to college. I got in at Tech, started going to school at Texas Tech, studying mechanical engineering, and but that summer, I was like, man, I really want to start flying. And so I ended up going to a place called Hub City Aviation. Met a guy named Louis Hilliard who started the program out there. He now works for the FAA, and he kind of gave me a job out there, and I started scrubbing airplanes and trying to get flight time and pushing my way through it, and just kind of wanting to learn and be around everything else that was out there. And so that's essentially what I did until I ended up taking out some loans to get some stuff out there. And I would never recommend anybody to take loans in aviation. Just work through it.
Well, and that's kind of part of the question I have is I've heard, and correct me where I'm wrong here, that to go into commercial aviation to fly for big airline, you have to have 1,500 hours ish. And so 1,500 hours. If you were in a starter Cessna like a 152 or something like that, I guess a lot of people learn in. What would you say is your cost per hour of flight time?
So whenever I started, I was spending less than $100 per hour of flight time. And that was expensive for me at the time.
Okay.
I thought I could do it for cheaper, but it's gotten to the point where now it's almost $200 an hour, depending on what airplane you're in. And that's base level or baseline kind of airplanes. They're older airplanes, right? With very basic avionics and whatnot, and so it gets pretty expensive. I did my initial private pilot license for under $4,000 all in. And now they're saying it could be anywhere from $7,000 to $8,000 at this time, depending on how you do it.
And that's just to get your license, not necessarily the hours you would need to then turn around and actually start making money off being a pilot.
Right.
So how does that work? How if you were 18 years old and wanted to go be a pilot, how do you do that without taking loans? How do you become a commercial pilot without going into extreme debt? I don't understand that.
Well, it's tough. So I was mowing yards at the time. I was mowing a bunch of grass at the time and paying for flight lessons. I would literally every week I would go mow 15 or 20 yards and then turn around and go fly a flight, and then wait till the next week and then mow those 15 or 20 yards and go fly a flight. So that's kind of what I did. Yeah. I think Richard Branson said it best. It's like the only way or the best way to make $1 million in aviation is to start out with $1 billion. So that's kind of the way that goes. But yeah, it's hard, it's really difficult because it's so expensive to do it. And then also if you wait or you lapse so much time in between each lesson, you lose a little bit, you've got to get that back. So it's almost better to keep it going, one after the other, or have the money readily available and then just go knock it out. Right. So, but yeah, it's tough. I mean, a lot of people take loans. It just takes them a long time to pay it back. And the big problem for me at that time was it was post 2000, post 9/11,
oh, yeah.
right? And so there was a lot of pilots out there, and they all wanted to work for the airlines. And of course, that was my end goal and what I thought I wanted to do. I just wanted to have the degree as a backup, but they just weren't hiring. And if you got hired, you had 5,000 hours and you were a fighter pilot, from or military trained of some kind, or had some really, really good acrobatic training or something like that, or something really good on your resume before they'd even look at you.
Wow.
And so it was really, really tough. So like I say, I ended up having to go into the oil field after that and worked there to start paying off what, the amount of money that I had loaned to get that back. And I was glad that I had that, because if I didn't, I'd have been kind of out of luck. So it's really expensive. It's really tough. But that's the thing about the aviation industry and most pilots that are out there, is they find a way to make it work. Right. And as a pilot, once you're up there and once you're committed, no one's going to help you. You've got to find a way to make it work. And so that's kind of the learning process of most pilots, is between financially, or just decision-making process, or just being able to deal with a hard situation and find a way to get, back on the ground safe and sound.
So you were, mid-20s, got your degree, you had your pilot's license, but you weren't a full-time pilot. So from that time in your life, what was the transition to then becoming a full-time pilot? And I guess, how old were you when you were full-time flying, and, how'd that work?
Yeah, so started out with my private pilot license before I got into college. When I went to college, then I was mowing grass and then also washing airplanes for them, kind of just taking on a bunch of jobs at that point. But I worked through my instrument. So you get your private pilot license first, And there's a few more variations like a sport pilot as well that you can get, which are a little cheaper and a little easier, but you've got to build the time no matter what. After that, your progression goes into an instrument rating, to where you can fly solely by instruments without visual reference.
And that's why I've seen, I don't know a lot about it, but that's when you see all the complex maps and
Yep.
all that. They're doing all these calculations, trying to figure out where they're going based off of that. And then is that instrument rating also for like if you're in thick cloud cover and you have to learn how to land the plane when you can't see anything out of your windshield or windscreen, whatever it's called on a plane?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yes. So basically in zero visibility up in the sky above the clouds, or even above the clouds, it can be completely visual above the clouds, but to get up through it, you have to have that instrument certificate.
Okay.
Or the instrument rating. And so it takes it takes a certain amount of time. So it takes roughly 40 hours is what the requirement is to get your private pilot license, and then roughly another 40 hours to get your instrument rating. So it's almost like a
Holy
whole
cow,
nother
it's all
rating.
doubling
right?
it basically.
Yeah. So it basically doubles your cost there. But the experience that you get from that instrument rating it makes you 100 times better pilot.
Wow.
You really, really understand the airplane and the physics a lot better. So, and then you turn around from there, and then I get your commercial rating, which only takes about 10 to 20 hours. But it's the most fun rating. It's where you're actually flying the airplane and you're showing a examiner that you can control and maneuver the aircraft in a precise manner to be able to receive compensation for your flight time. And that's required by the feds at that point. And then you turn around from there, and then I went and started flying skydivers.
Oh wow!
To
Did
build
you really?
time. Yeah. So I was doing hop and pops all day long, just up and down out of a small little place.
That's got to be great training though, just
Texas.
going up and down,
it's
up
great.
and down, up and
Yeah.
down.
Well, and not only that, but you're dealing with people at that point. Whether they're good or bad experiences with with your passengers. And you're going up and down and up and down, and then as a skydiving pilot, you're not taking on a whole bunch of fuel because you don't want the weight. So you're having to calculate how much fuel you're going to be taking for the amount of time you're going to be in the air, and you try to make it just enough to meet your minimums with reserves to be able to get back to the airport and get you go up there to 14,000 feet, dump out your passengers, and come on back down.
Well, I kind of cut you off, but where was that in Texas?
I was in Stanton, Texas.
Stanton, Texas. Any crazy stories come out of that, or any fun ones skydiving?
I mean, there's a ton. I remember one time where, the owner of the drop zone is what they'd call him. He had two sons, and his sons had two friends with him, and so they, he was just like, y'all just go up and have the last jump of the day. Let's, y'all enjoy it, right? And so I was like, all right, cool. I'm getting paid for it anyway, so I'll go up there with them. And so we would have races to where I would try to go up, let them out, and then I would try to get back down to the ground before they did, right? And then whoever did, got a case of soda pop or whatnot, right? So so they go up with me, and we're in a Cessna 182, which has these struts that hang off and support the wing from the landing gear up to the wing. And so all these four kids decide that they're going to jump or reach on and grab onto the stabilizer, and they're all going to hang off of it for as long as they can and then let go all at the same time.
I think I've seen that plane with the videos of people will climb out on it and then hang on.
They climb out and they hang on it. And so
Yeah.
I had all four of these kids over there, and I'm at 14,000 feet, which the airplane doesn't like to fly at that high of an altitude
Is
anyway.
the air's too thin or what?
Air's thin,
Yeah.
the engine's not producing a whole lot of power, and so I'm sitting there holding it with the rudder at full deflection and the ailerons full over, and then all of a sudden the airplane brakes. And so it goes into a spin as these guys are like trying to let go. And so I had to like shake them off and then recover from the spin and then turn around and come down. Which,
Holy cow.
It's really a non-event. Spins and stalls sound like very, very, very scary words and terms in the aviation industry, right? But it's really a benign event if you know how to recover from it and know how to manage your energy to be able to successfully I guess, back yourself out of it and get the wing flying again. So.
How does that work with skydiving when they jump out? Like, what is you have to have a path down, they have to have a path down. How do you not hit each other? I mean, because I know you're moving quick, so what is the technicalities there?
Well, so typically you're dropping them, you're looking at the uppers, so the winds aloft, right? So you're looking at the winds aloft at how that's going to affect their drop and their free fall, right? So you, as you're circling the airport in kind of a box drill, you go to the point where the wind is and calculate it to where they're going to drop, and then they'll end up somewhere close to the airport or the landing zone, whichever that is, if it's off airport. And then at that point, once they jump out, then I will continue the descent away from them, keeping them in sight the entire time. So I'll go into a bank or a fall to where I'm watching the last guy that fell. And then once they open their canopies, you can kind of, it's pretty easy to see them, but it's your job to make sure that you're completely clear of where they are. And
that's pilot responsibility.
Pilot in command. Okay. Yep, that's your responsibility.
So when they were hanging on, did they get hurt or hit each other?
No, they were fine. I mean, they all jumped out. They're wearing protective gear and stuff, but at the same rate, it was just,
a little wild.
It's like, let go.
I feel like they probably loved it though. They were probably having fun just sitting there,
Yeah, I mean, it's an adrenaline junkie sport, and great guys, and and so many people go to skydive one time, and some people that's enough for them, right? Some people never do it.
How many times have you jumped out of the plane?
I've jumped out of the plane once, and I never did it in Stanton, Texas, because I told myself I didn't want to jump out over a desert. The first time I jumped out of the airplane, and they also wouldn't allow me to jump out of the airplane because they said the last 3 pilots that they had stopped flying for them because they just wanted to jump out of the airplane.
They wouldn't let you.
Yeah, they were like, you can go somewhere else and learn how to jump. Like, we're not going to do that here.
You said in your first lesson you had a 130 horsepower motor or engine?
It was 140, yeah.
140? How fast does that go?
So it was 140 horsepower with bored-out jugs to where it gave it 160 horsepower technically. But that
What's
airplane,
a bored-out jug? What was that term?
Yeah. So basically, it just bores out the cylinders to where they put
I see.
bigger cylinders on them to where they can produce more power, 20 more horsepower on the same crank, essentially. And so Cherokee 160 would do about 115 to 120 knots.
What's that in
so like
miles per hour?
125 to 130 miles an hour.
That's not that fast.
Yeah. No, it's pretty slow, but I mean, you're building time and you're trying to do the cheapest thing you can do. I think he rented that thing to me for $70 an hour, and then I paid him $25 an hour for flight instruction.
Oh, wow.
I imagine it's gotten quite a bit more expensive since then.
Considerably. Yeah. So that same airplane, you probably couldn't get it for less than $120 to $130 wet, which means with fuel. And then you're going to pay probably $50 to $100 an hour for flight instruction.
Gotcha.
Wow, it's gotten so expensive.
Not really expensive.
I've got a fun skydiving story for you. So I've only been skydiving once.
Okay.
And I'd like to go again. I mean, I had a blast, but I went to skydive San Marcos.
Yep.
And I went. My girlfriend wanted to go. Like, there's always people that say they want to go, and then you're always like, all right, let's pick a date, and then it just never happens. And so, it was, this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I had a Friday off, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going by myself. I'm just going to go show up and go do it. And so I go down there, and they're training. Before you go, is you go into like this big room, they put you in the suit, and there's a piece of duct tape on the floor, and they make you stand on it, and they're like, all right, when you go out, it was like a 10-minute ordeal of like, keep your head back, you lean forward, whatever. So I'm like, okay, no big deal. And we get in the plane, and I'm strapped to the dude in the seat. I'm first one on the bay door. So when that door opens up, I'm like right here on it. And then there's a couple guys sitting down at the end. There was an instructor with the whole camera gear set up, and then this old man, white hair, white beard, and he's just sitting there chilling in the back of the plane. And so we're going up, but the doors open as we were going up, and then we're like maybe halfway up, and the old man just goes limp, just like falls down and just like rolls out of the plane. Like, he looks like he just passed out and rolled out of the plane. I'm sitting there, and the instructor goes, oh shit, and like looks around. So like everyone's like, what in the hell just happened? And apparently that's called a hop and pop or something. And you go halfway up if you're trying to test out new equipment and whatnot. But I will never forget that, just sitting there, and all of a sudden this guy just goes limp and just like rolls out of the plane. I was like, holy cow. But
that's crazy. Well, and they do. So we did that. So we do static lines as well. We do static lines and then hop and pops whenever people were just starting to learn. So some of these people never jumped out and did a tandem where you actually have an instructor connected to you and jump out of the airplane. And then these static lines, these people would just start out with a static line. They'd literally just jump out there and have a radio that's connected to them that have some guy just walk them down, from the ground and talk them down. So we dump those guys out, and then you do a hop and pop where you just go a little bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of free falling, you literally just jump out of the airplane and throw the rogue chute to pull out your main chute right when you jump out.
So there's no free fall. You just
free fall, and then you go up from there. And I'm sure there's some sort of I'm sure there's regulation requirements for how many times you have to do that, and what you have to do to get certified. I don't know those. That's not my expertise.
Yeah.
They just told me when to get them out.
You prefer flying the plane?
Yeah, I prefer flying it. Yeah, and some people say, why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane? Well, nobody's seen a skydiving airplane. You definitely want to wear a chute flying these things.
Yeah. That was another thing I noticed when we got in. That was the first thing I noticed getting in the plane was the pilot was wearing a parachute. Yeah. I'm like, all right, I see what level we're operating at here.
At least we're all on the same scale. Yeah.
And I was nervous until we got high enough, and then I was like, okay, I'm feeling better. And then the dude rolls out. I'm like, what in the hell is this? Yeah. But great experience. So, all right, so back to the Brint story. So you were, West Texas still, or I forgot where it was, doing skydiving and, flights. And then from there, where'd you go?
So from there, I ended up getting a job, or I ended up getting my flight instructor certification after that. And so passed that check ride and then went to and started flight instructing from Hub City Aviation there and doing some other flight schools in the area. Started a flight school myself, worked on that for a little while, then turned around and got multi-engine ratings, multi-engine instructor, instrument instructor ratings, and just kind of built those up as I was living there, and then ended up getting a job working with a real estate development company out of Lubbock there, flying a Beechcraft Baron for them. And that was my first.
Just like as a private gig, just flying around the people? Yep. Okay.
So I took a guy and his girlfriend to go pick up a dog, and they were like, we should buy an airplane. And I was, okay. And then I hear from him like a few weeks later, and he was just like, I just bought an airplane, and you want to fly it for us? And I was like, absolutely, let's do it. So
wow.
That was my first intro to working in private aviation, and I just loved it.
How'd that gig work? Did they pay you like a salary? Were they paying you flight time, or how does that gig work if you're a private pilot?
So initially they were paying me by the flight, and then they decided to put me on a salary, and it was it's pretty low, but at the same time it was
you can pay to fly. Yeah.
And so basically I'd just go into their office there in the middle of town, and I'd kind of learn some real estate development stuff that they were doing and kind of look at the projects they had, and then we all just ended up becoming friends, and I would work on my engineering stuff, homework from their office, and just kind of talk with them and just study for school, and then it ended up being a pretty cool deal. They were ex football players at Tech, and so it was kind of cool, kind of fun to hear their stories during the glory days and stuff there, and so it was a really good deal.
So from flying the real estate folks, that private gig, what was your next move from there?
So from there I went, I graduated, or I ended up going to work for another outfit while I was out there as well, running that flight school. And the flight school, it was a guy who, they had me running this flight school, and they gave me 3 airplanes, and they told me to just, do whatever I needed to do, right? Get these airplanes running. So I was running it, and then they ended up coming to me one day and saying, hey, you're making money in aviation. Like, that's not what we need you to do here. And I was like, what? Like, I was kind of intrigued by that. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a business. I'm supposed to make money, right? That's how this works. They're like, no, we need this to be a tax write-off. And I was like, they were like, what do we need to do to spend
to lose
more
money? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, there's, we could buy another airplane. We could do this. And so we ended up buying some more airplanes. And then I ended up finding out that, a few months later, this guy's name was Jody Nelson, and he was a CFO for Patterson Drilling out there, and they had found out that he had been embezzling a bunch of money from a publicly traded company, and that was the reason that I needed to lose money. And so I was like, well, so, was met at the airport by the FBI and was basically like, where have you been, and why have you been flying these airplanes? And
holy cow.
Had to help a federal officer put locks and chains on all the airplanes, and I just didn't have a job after that.
So that came to a screeching halt. Holy cow! What a crazy story.
But I'm sorry, that was before I got the job with the real estate development company.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Those guys were they're legit. They're doing very well in their ventures now. I think they're billionaires now. But
you still work with them and fly for them?
Not really. I still talk with them. They're still friends every once in a while. But yeah, they ended up going to the oil and gas industry and doing very well. So.
Nice.
But it was crazy. That whole airport, they were like, we're going to pay for your grad school. We want you to be here forever, and like tell us what we can do to keep you on.
Wow.
And we want you to help, use your engineering degree and run some of our businesses and stuff. So I thought my whole life was set right there, right? And then
knock knock.
yeah, there it goes.
So no warning, you just showed up at the airfield and there's FBI waiting for you?
Well, I had flown his mother in. We had a twin, a Cessna 310. And so he had called me out of the blue and said, hey, can you fly my mom to the lake house? And I was like, sure, I can do that, no problem. So I loaded her up in the plane and flew her out to the lake house. She was like, oh, they just love you. Like, everything's going well. Like, we're so happy you're with us. And congratulations on your graduation coming up. And then turned around and she dropped her off and then turned around and went back. And that was whenever I met.
Wow.
Were they like suit and tie agents or like AR across the chest?
They were dressed up, but yeah, they were agents. They had the badge on their belt and everything, just ready to.
Did they arrest the guy?
Ask questions? Do what?
Did they arrest the owner?
Apparently, they were arresting him at that point or the next day.
Did he live in Lubbock?
Yeah, he lived in Lubbock. Had a big house there. We were flying him back and forth to Dallas to go build a new house and all kinds of other stuff. And his brother had a construction company and stuff there. But anyway, that was all. I don't know all the details of what happened or after that. I just kind of was like,
yeah, I'd probably run for the hills after that.
They give you a nice severance package when you greeted by the feds. Like, sorry.
Absolutely not. I was like, I don't know anything. I was just working here. Like,
you probably don't want their money at that point too.
Well, yeah, and there was a paycheck that never showed up, but at the same rate, I'm never going to see that again. But
did the feds kind of know that you were innocent and not?
Yeah, they knew, but at the same time, I think whenever they showed up, I think they had all of their homework done and knew exactly probably who I was and what I was doing.
Not too much interrogation.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot. It was like,
that's good.
It was like, where have you been? I think he was more so asking if I had taken the suspect anywhere specifically because
they just wanted info out of you, really. Yeah.
And I just said I took his mom to the place and dropped her off because that's what I was told to do, and here I am. And they were like, all right, it's fine.
Wow.
Help us put locks on all the airplanes.
Holy cow.
Don't take them anywhere.
How do you lock up an airplane? Just chains around the motors or something?
Yeah,
or?
So what they do is you put like a protected chain, a chain with like either a Kevlar belt or something around it to protect the airplane, but you put it around the propeller or a critical flight component or something like that.
So back to your timeline. So, FBI raids you, you're, you're out of a job.
Yep.
Shit, now what?
Yeah. So, that was whenever I flew the guy.
Oh, and then you went to the real estate. That's right. And so how'd that one wrap up? Yeah.
So essentially they were at the point where they were either going to move forward with that airplane or sell it and kind of move on. And I had just graduated. I'd asked them about paying for grad school, and they were kind of reluctant at that point, but they were just starting out. They offered me a salary to stay that was a little better, but at that point I was in the oil and gas industry, and I just graduated with a mechanical engineering degree, and so a company offered me,
probably a good, nice gig.
A nice gig for a 21, 22-year-old kid with a signing bonus to go live in Houston and work for a pipeline company, and I was like, well, if you guys can't match this, I'm going to go down here, basically. And what I thought was make some real good money. Ended up that company that they had, they ended up selling it for something like $2 billion. And I should have stayed working with them. And looking back at it, but
you never know.
You never know. Yeah. And at the time, it was a great gig for me, and it was a great experience to go move somewhere and leave aviation for a little bit. I tried to continue my flight instruction while I was in Houston, which I did a little bit of it. But in Houston, there's so much traffic from where I was living to go to where I wanted to. And then once you get off work, it was it's hard. Yeah. Really just that commitment to get out there, especially after you've been kind of fatigued from working all day and then sitting in traffic for an hour and then turn around. And I was trying to do some flight instruction out there, and it was just hard.
Just too much, yeah.
Yeah, it was just too much. So stayed at that job, working, an office job, desk job, 9 to 5 or 7 to 4. For a little over a year and a half there, and then I saw an opportunity to come back to Lubbock and go finish my graduate degree, and so I ended up doing that and started doing some more flight instruction again at that point to kind of pay my way through, and then stuck with it, and then ended up getting a job with Baker Hughes to go be a logging engineer for directional drilling, and started working there, making pretty good money. Did that for about a year, and then got an.
Was that West Texas?
Yeah, that was
still
still.
okay.
Well, so it was out of Houston. The company was based out of Houston, but I was drilling in North Texas, Southern Oklahoma, and then kind of in those regions.
Mm-hmm.
And then they offered me to do an international position in Nigeria. And so I went and lived in Nigeria for a little while.
Did you really? I had no idea.
So I was working with directional drillers out there in Nigeria, working offshore in the Gulf of Guinea.
Is directional drilling like the nicer word than fracking because of or is that the same thing?
No, well, so directional drilling is basically once you take a vertical depth and you're trying to find a formation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the formation is pretty uniform over a given.
It's kind of like a shelf
right?
that you get to.
Kind of like a shelf you're trying to go to. So what you're trying to do is land as much pipe as you can in that shelf so that you've got more pore space to get more
Gotcha.
oil out. And rather than drilling a whole bunch of holes, you can drill like one and get an exponentially greater amount of oil out of the ground for less resources. So
okay, interesting.
and then once you're in that area, then you fracture it to make even more pore space, right? So
okay.
that's what it's that for. But now directional drilling it's basically like I was really I got to where I was directional drilling, and I was surprised at how similar it was to my instrument rating in flying.
Oh, interesting, because you're looking at all the different.
You're basically just looking at an attitude indicator, and at that point you're getting an elevation and an altitude and a direction, and you're just trying to stay on that as you're moving through this formation.
Wow.
And so it was easy.
How do you tell when you hit the oil? Is it like a pressure differential or something, or?
No, so you use logging tools. So we had nuclear sources and radioactive sources that were in the hole with us, and then also like gamma detection equipment that were down there, and then we used a pulse motor to basically just send like Morse code back up to the surface, and then you have a pressure transducer which tells you which reads those pulses and the pressure, and then it tells you kind of what your readings are and if you're in the zone or not. So it's pretty cool how it all works.
Sounds very interesting, but also way less fun than the typical Western movie where you strike oil and there's a big gusher of oil. So I feel like they should do that just out of celebration, throw some oil up. I don't know, it seems fun.
Well, it sounds fun, but whenever it actually happens,
from the outside.
I was drilling in Louisiana after a time after that. I went and lived in Australia for a little while, and then came back over and lived in Louisiana. And we were drilling out there. We were drilling gas wells, and those gas wells would, a bubble down at 7,000 to 12,000 feet, depending on how far you were down, is this big, and then as it comes up to the surface, it gets really big, right? And so it will lift all the fluid that you have to hold that static pressure out, and the thing could blow out on you. And that's how wells blow out, like we've all heard about with the BP spill and stuff like that. But it's really scary. And so you have a blowout preventer out there, which basically holds that pressure back and then flares off the gas. And we had to do that in Louisiana. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. It sounds just with all that pressure building up too. Yeah.
So that's what that flame is in West Texas over the oil rigs.
Some of them,
burning off that pressure.
Like some of them on an active drilling rig, yes. But then if you've got an active field which has already been drilled and cased and produced, then a lot of that is they're flaring off gas that's just can't be used. That's it could be toxic. So
Gotcha.
like those H2S gas is just it's a odorless gas that's really toxic, and so a lot of times they just flare it off. So
interesting.
So how long were you drilling for?
I was working in the oil and gas industry for 8 years. So
Wow.
I was working out in Nigeria, and then I moved to Hobbs in Mexico and worked with a really great company out there for a little while, and that's where I was stationed enough and wanted to get out of Hobbs, New Mexico as much as I could. So then I bought my first airplane at that point.
So how old were you when you were back to New Mexico? You'd already done Africa.
Mm-hmm.
This Australia, I had no idea. Where'd that? You went to Australia and then back to New Mexico, or how's that? Okay.
Yeah. So that all just kind of played in, and then moved back out there. But then so I went to Hobbs in Mexico, and started working for an oil company out there, where I was actually in charge of the drilling rigs.
Oh, very cool.
I had 3 or 4 rigs that I was in charge of and drilling those. And then at that point, we worked a schedule where we worked. What did we work? It was like 10 days on, 4 days off, or something like that. So then in those 4 days, you could just get lost. And so I decided to buy a plane, and that's whenever I started coming down and hanging out in Austin. And I bought my first RV4, which is an experimental home-built airplane, which is it's a pretty well-known airplane, and I bought it from a well-known builder that was already built, so I didn't do anything to build the airplane. But I bought it from a guy out of Denver, flew it back, and then that was my transportation to go back and forth to, that was my little Texas taxi cab just to get back home. So
the RV4, I've been flying with you in one of your planes. Is that the same one I went up in, the black one?
Similar. So I have an RV8 now, and before this RV8, which is the airplane that we've flown, I had the RV4, which is a similar model. It's just a little bit smaller, but same tandem seating action, and very, very acrobatic airplane. So
that's what I noticed about flying in that one with you is I've only been in commercial planes, and then Cessna's very slow planes, and we got up in that one with you, and it feels like you're in a Corvette in the sky. I mean, you start banking around, and it was really so cool. But will you explain the whole home-built kit airplane? I mean, it was so funny when I went up with you, and I took a selfie because you have to, and behind my head it says in bold letters experimental, and so it's like I remember showing that to Katie, and she was like, "What did you go flying in?" And I was trying to explain it to her, and I just butchered it. So will you explain what that is exactly?
Yeah, so the FAA requires that any passengers have a placard in the aircraft that show them that this is a amateur-built aircraft.
Lovely.
Right? So you have to put experimental in these big words, and it says this is an amateur-built aircraft. And it basically warns them and tells them this isn't a certified built airplane, right?
I'm shocked that that's even allowed. I guess they're still super safe and all that, but I mean, it's amateur built aircraft does not give me a lot of confidence in flying.
Right. And the thing is like I'm sure a little bit of that is kind of some bureaucracy for all the other airplane manufacturers who are certified, who have to go all through the hoops and the legalities to make sure that their airplane is legal and then or safe, and then they sell them, right? They've got to go through a whole bunch of checks through the FAA. There's an inspector that goes through everything and makes sure the airplane. Then there's a test pilot and a flight test and all these other legalities that they have to go through and make sure that the airplane's safe before they can actually sell them. And so the airplane itself may only cost a set amount of dollars to build. Like let's say it cost $10,000 to build this airplane, right? But then you have to pay another probably $80,000 to $100,000 to make the airplane legal to fly, right?
So that's on the experimental planes, is all of that?
Insurance. No, well, not on the experimentals.
Okay, but on the other ones.
Like a Cessna or a Piper, or
Gotcha.
your Cirruses or other aircraft like that. For them to be certified, they have to go through all these tests to make them certified. As for an experimental airplane, you have to build it, and then what you have to do is prove to an examiner, an FAA examiner, that the airplane is airworthy. This examiner, who's proficient in amateur-built aircraft, will come out there and test and look at all the flight controls and look at your weight and balance and look at the aircraft's, basically just general inspection, and then he'll actually watch you go fly it. Right?
I was gonna say that's the test of them all. Will this thing fly?
Yeah,
good luck, buddy.
And then he'll sign it off to be, illegal flying. Whatever,
So once it's signed off and approved, I mean, then can you turn around at that point and sell the aircraft if you wanted to? I mean, it's fully legal at that point.
Yeah, it's fully legal, and once it's got its certificate, its airworthiness certificate, then you can sell it or do whatever.
Do planes have titles? I mean, how does that work if you go and sell a plane?
Yeah. So you have a registration, and then you have a airworthiness certificate, right? And so between those two, those are the legal documents that are required by the entities that allow you to legally fly that aircraft in the U.S. airspace. So.
Very cool. So, you got your RV4, you were, pitter-patting around with that. What was that transition from there to because I know you're a full-time pilot now, so I'm trying to get there. Where'd you go from, that stage? What was next for you?
So then, so I bought the RV4, and I was living in Austin. I kind of made a place in Austin. I was just flying back and forth to the job there. Then I was offered a position in Louisiana to go kind of do the same thing, but start, with a startup company in Louisiana. Went out there, took the job there, and was flying back and forth to Austin. But, the weather in New Mexico is always dry, and it's very seldomly cloudy. And if it is, it's a thunderstorm or something like that, and it just blows through, and it's, it's largely VFR, visual flight conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
They call it VMC, visual meteorological conditions. So at that point, I was flying that RV4, and it was strictly a VFR airplane for visual flight rules. And then I turned around and I took the job in Louisiana, and I started one day. I took off, and it was completely visual, and it was expected to be completely visual. Started flying that direction, and by the time I got there, the temperature and dew point spread had fallen so close together that the visibility had just completely diminished, and I was stuck up in the air. And I looked at the forecast and everything, and I was turning around, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And so I ended up getting lower and lower and lower and lower, and at this point I flew to the point where I was flying so low that I was just a little bit worried about it. And then in the distance, probably about 2,000 to 3,000 feet away, I start seeing some flashing lights of a radio antenna tower. And I looked at that, and it scared me so bad that I just landed at the next airport that I could and just laid on the ground, and just like my heart was pounding.
Holy
like
cow.
that could have been it,
So that plane didn't have instruments. Like, it didn't have what you would need to actually fly off of instruments in
Right.
those conditions?
It had instruments. It had enough instruments for visual conditions.
Okay.
Right, to be legal, but it was not an instrument airplane. I was an instrument-rated pilot, but I didn't have an instrument-rated airplane.
Okay.
So at that point, I was like, you know what? It's time to sell this airplane and buy an airplane with instruments, or put instruments into this airplane. So I ended up finding someone who had an RV-8, which was not completely finished yet, who was not far away from where I was, and it had been built by people who had built experimental aircraft, the same ones. They've built 12 or 13 of them before. And so I was looking at this airplane, and I was like, wow, it had very good craftsmanship, and it had all the instruments on it to be an instrument airplane. So I ended up selling off my RV4. The airplane sold in a week after I posted it, and I probably should have sold it for more, but I was the guy that I sold it to was really, really great. And that's the other thing in the aviation community. You meet some really great people, some very well-motivated people who have the drive and desire to start a task and finish it, and do it the right way, right? So it's a kind of its own little community or fraternity of humans who have really tried and pushed to make sure that they can that they've got their ducks in a row, and they can they're driven individuals anyway. And so at that point, I ended up buying this RV-8 from a guy who was going to turn around. He had just ran into a bunch of money, and he was selling this RV-8 that he was building because he was going to buy a P-51 Mustang.
Holy cow.
So it was like, whoa, like that's a complete different situation. So bought this airplane. It was completely unfinished, no paint on it, the engine barely had 40 hours on it. It only had like 5 or 10 hours on it. So I had to fly a bunch of hours off on the airplane to get it certified, and took it, bought it, and then turned around and made it my own, helped finish it. So
very cool. And
is RV-8 bigger than RV-4? What's the difference?
It's a little bit bigger. It's got a little bit more space. It's a little bit faster, depending on what engine you have on it. Like I say, an experimental, it's like, it's the wild, wild west of airplanes.
I don't think I'll be getting any experimental
planes. You say that, but I'll show you my experimental, and you'll probably be like, all right, I get it. But but rightfully so, right? There are some experimentals in there that I probably won't even get in, but some people think, they're great. So, but that's the cool thing about the aviation world and the experimental market, is that you can, anybody with any kind of, goals or ambitions can go out there and build an airplane and fly it, and it's their own, right? So.
Wow. So the RV-8, you needed that for after your scary flight in Louisiana. What brought you back here, or when did you go? I know you went to NetJet, so how did that apply in to the timeline?
I ended up, the company that was out there in Louisiana, we ended up kind of going our separate ways, and then so I ended up just coming to Austin and was like, I'm tired of living in oil field towns and being gone all the time. I was, almost 30 at the time, so I was thinking to myself, man, I gotta, start thinking about families and, be living where I want to live, right? So I was like, I think I want to live in Austin. That's where a lot of my friends are, and right on the lake there, and like I really enjoy the spot and the airport that I had. So moved to Austin, And then I was like, man, once I got here, I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to I tried to get some oil and gas jobs, but it was 2013 and the jobs weren't really there. I was thinking about everything that was kind of moving around, and then one of my buddies was like, can you fly a King Air? And I was like, well, I have King Air time, which I was flying with the guys back in Lubbock.
Is that a bigger plane? What is it, King Air?
Yeah, it's a bigger. So a King Air is a twin-engine turboprop,
Okay.
Which is basically a jet engine that spins a propeller blade.
I've flown on a turboprop as a four-seater.
Yep. And so the King Air is a very, very popular twin-engine turboprop that very safe airplane that flies here in in the
How much
States.
do those run new?
A new King Air,
Mhm.
I don't know, probably like $3 to $5 million depending on what they
Wow.
are. But you can get a used one, a good used one for $1 million range, $1.2 million.
Wow.
So, but yeah, so apparently there's a big pilot shortage that we're kind of into right now, and it was because all the airlines, to basic, and the reason I tell people not to take a whole bunch of debt, learn how to fly, is because the regional airlines weren't paying these guys anything. Whenever I was there to go work at a regional airline, they were going to pay you $35,000 a year your first year,
Wow.
which even back then was no money,
Mhm.
right? You're basically living on food stamps, living with your parents, basically. And then so there was just no way to make ends meet, especially with the loans that I had and everything that were there from school. I had to figure something else out, so that's why I went to the oil field. But I had a buddy that was working for him, and he was working for the regionals, and you would have to go to the regional, and you'd probably stay there for 3 to 5 years as a first officer, and then you would move up to captain, and you'd probably have to stay there for another year or two as a captain before you'd even have a chance to get on with a major carrier, one of the Uniteds, Southwest, Americans, Deltas, and that's where you would your first year at any carrier, you're not really going to make anything because they're basically making you pay for your or pay back your training, because your training for your type rating in the airplane's going to cost you like $200,000. It's what it's going to cost the company to train you in that new jet, and then that year after, your pay essentially doubles. So you just got to get through that first year kind of thing. But it was going to take forever to get there, and you just going through the regionals and stuff like that, it just wasn't there at that time. Now it's a lot better. The pay's a lot better for those guys. But for me, I decided to go fly this King Air and look for jobs on the side. And then as I was flying that King Air, somebody else offered me a job, and so I was flying. I was instructing in a PA-46, which is a Piper Malibu, which is a 6-seater pressurized airplane, and then turned around and took that job and was instructing with some clients in around here in Austin, and then turned around and I ended up getting a job offer with a company called 4Flight, which is a company based out of here in Austin or Houston. They're bought by Boeing now, but it basically is a mobile app for all of your charts and everything.
For pilots.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And so we used to have a huge bag full of all of our charts and maps and stuff, and then we'd have to, every 28 days, we'd have to take all of those charts out and put new ones in and buy new ones every 28 days. So every pilot at that point that was an instrument pilot especially had a whole bag of charts, and then just would throw away this,
Why every 28 days?
So every 28 days they put out a new cycle or updates of all the instrument procedures and approach procedures and arrival procedures that are required for every airport, right? Whether somebody builds a new antenna or a tree grows or something like that, then your heights and your minimums and altitudes all change. And so every 28 days is when those cycles would change over.
Do they update faster now that it's on the app?
No, so they still update the same as far as the cycles are the same, but now you just hit download on your phone and it's there, it's all legal, right?
Gotcha.
As to where before then we were like flipping through each page and then changing out one page at a time. Which was really cool because I'd been using that app since I started flying, and I ended up working for him here as a customer support agent. So I was, as a pilot and an instructor and working for that, I was really kind of moving into the aviation career again and really having a fun time with, in the tech industry here in Austin, which was really big, and then also in the aviation industry. So I was meeting clients and picking stuff up, and then I ended up working for Wheels Up for a little while, flying the King Air for them.
Wheels Up, is that like a like a service you can, if I wanted to go fly to Dallas for a weekend, I could call Wheels Up, or what is Wheels Up exactly?
Wheels Up is kind of like what we were talking about earlier. They're like a membership program for airplanes. So if you want to you become a member of, or you buy a membership, right, and then you can pay to use their airplanes that'll take you from one place to the other, right? And so it's King Airs and Citations and et cetera, what they have there. Now they've been bought by Delta Private Jets, and they've got all kinds of stuff going on for them now. But basically, yeah, it's like the Uber of and aviation.
But a membership program to do it kind of deal. Right. Okay, interesting. So how long were you working with them for?
So I was working with them for 2 years, and then I ended up getting a job with NetJets, who is, Berkshire Hathaway company. Is everybody kind of knows NetJets.
They're kind of like the leader in that space as far as really membership.
And, it was like it was a really, really great job, and I was able to land that at a really good time in my life, and a really good time for the company whenever they were just about to get on a hiring boom. So ended up working with them for 4 years, working my way up to from a first officer to a captain there, and then ended up getting a job with Southwest Airlines. Is essentially where I am now. And
I'm fascinated on that transition because I met you, I guess, when you were at NetJets. Well, actually, it's kind of a fun story how I met you, actually, because I started that Instagram account, Hike Austin, I've got, and what was it? Icon reached out to me, and they said, hey, do you want to go on a test flight? And basically a flying jet ski. They did not use those terms, obviously, but that's what it looks like to me. Yep. And I was like, heck yeah, let's go. And so I showed up, and you were the pilot there. And I get into this literal flying jet ski. We go land in Lake Travis, land in all the different lakes around here, fly by the 360 bridge, land in Lake Austin. It was just the coolest thing. And you and I, started talking. And then here recently, I heard that you were going to Southwest, and I've been scratching my head because to me, working at NetJet as a captain, you're flying private jets. They've got to be fun to fly. You're flying really fascinating people. And so you're going from that to what I love Southwest, but don't get me wrong, it's a city bus of the sky. So why would you go from NetJet private jet to Southwest? No ill will against Southwest, but it's a little different than a private jet.
It was hard to leave NetJets because it was such a good job. It really, really is a good job. And the flying was so fun, and you're flying with celebrities and, the people that you meet and see on TV. All of a sudden they're, back there, their lives are in your hands, and they're like very, they're like, excuse me, sir, how's the turbulence of the weather going to be today, sir? And, saying sir to me when literally everybody's watching these guys on TV, it was kind of fun. Or sports athletes, It's fun to see these big, tough guy sports athletes sit on the airplane and be like, is it going to be bumpy today? So
hit a little turbulence and get scared.
Just sitting there, to just kind of flip the script. But no, it was a great job, a lot of fun there. But the real thing is I wanted to fly bigger airplanes, and the pay and the benefits are so much better. And a company like Southwest Airlines, they really do take care of their pilots. They've never furloughed or laid off any pilots. So as to where at NetJets, they definitely have laid off some people, and it's all to keep the lights on. And they offered the people their jobs back, which was and I've talked to many people who have been through those. But the thing about the aviation industry is it's real cyclical. Like one day it's going to be really great. Like right now, there's a huge pilot hiring boom, and it's great for pilots right now. And one day if the economy keeps going south or whatever, or oil prices go way high, then all of a sudden they may not need as many pilots. And so I looked at it, and the best place for me with for job security and for growth and financial gain for myself and my future family are probably there at Southwest. So.
That makes sense. I could be wrong here, but I've heard rumors that I've heard, everyone's probably heard about the pilot shortage. But I've heard ridiculous things, I don't know if it's true or not, that, Southwest American people like that are paying pilots with not that much experience, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year. Is that true?
Yeah. I'm not there yet, but it's right there.
Wow.
It's
amazing.
Pretty close. And it's amazing how quickly it's come, but duly so. Or rightfully so anyway. It takes you so much to get to that point. And a lot of these guys have, spent so much, because a lot of even these newer pilots, even though they're coming in with minimum time, have still spent $200,000, $150,000 to, north of $200,000 in student loans to get to that point, just to be able to do it. And then this is also a reason why, recommend people not to take out a whole lot of loans and money to do that, because what happens if you get through and you lose your medical? I have to maintain a first-class medical, a clean bill of health to be able to fly these airplanes. If something happens and I have a medical issue that I just have no control over, then
you're out,
literally my entire career could go away tomorrow.
Wow.
And there's insurance and stuff for that, but at the same time, you'll never make as much as you could as a healthy, working pilot. So,
in the commercial airline space, what percentage of the pilots are ex-military?
So at Southwest, it's probably almost half. Like it really is. They have had a really, really good success rate with hiring military trained pilots, and Southwest is really taking care of them there. And a lot of the airlines too have done that, but at the same time, it's probably a little more heavy at Southwest than at other airlines, but it's still, it's anywhere from the 40 to 60% range. It's for those military.
I would figure so,
pilots.
Given the barrier of entry with all the upfront costs out of pocket for the training and the hours.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, it's like right now there's not as many military pilots like being trained. There's a lot less, fighter pilots out there, as to where, most of these guys right now, and the biggest reason for the pilot shortage is that most of these guys are the end of the Vietnam era pilots, right? So these are all the guys who were trained during the Vietnam era, whenever there was, the Soviets were a big problem and all kinds of wars were being fought. So we were training pilots left and right. And then all of a sudden, we decided that, for the powers that be, that we just don't need as many fighter pilots. And so now there's a lot less. And all those guys got out and got hired at these airlines. And over the next, 5 to 10 years, they're going to be retiring like crazy, because you have to retire from a major airline at 65 years old.
Gotcha.
So they're all just aging out, basically.
So they're all just aging out, and they're forced to retire at that point.
We should apply that to general politics.
Yeah, we should apply that to a lot of things.
What a logical thought.
Yeah.
Wow. Airlines really haven't figured out. Yeah, I know the military recruitment's at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a scary thought.
It really is.
I heard it on a podcast. I wish I knew the exact name, but it was apparently on the FAA, whatever it's called, website or news board. They were announcing their new hiring standards. It was very dramatic I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It was talking about psychiatric people with mental issues.
Yeah. That
they were going to DEI their way in.
Right. And I don't know a whole lot about that. And like I say, I know there's going to be restrictions on that for sure, and it has been a topic of conversation with our pilot union and some of the other people out there. But
that was terrifying to read. I was like, I don't want to fly anymore.
Yeah. The thing is like, and the other thing is, most of these airlines, you're not going to read about them, but there's been some incidences that have happened due to lack of experience, because of the shift in experience that's gone down, right? And it all gets kind of swept under the rug.
I'm sure they try to do that as much as possible.
And they try to do as much as possible, because let's face it, unless there's a crash, like, everything's fine and everything can be fixed, right? And so that's the last thing you want in aviation ever, is to have any kind of a fatality. But also the safety measures nowadays are not what they, are leaps and bounds above what they were years ago.
You used to have people smoking on the plane.
That people were smoking on the airplanes. The airplanes themselves were, just kind of, the technology wasn't there like it is today. They don't have the safety or, computers to, log and track all of these statistics, as to where now every single landing, every single takeoff is, logged and monitored. We have restrictions that we have to be on a stable approach within 1,000 feet before we ever even get to the runway. So you're not trying to hot dog it down. There's rules and stuff against that. So, but the industry is very, very safe. The jets are very, very safe. If something goes wrong, it was really, really a series of events that made something happen, right? Now, apparently a door just fell off.
Yeah, just flew off the Alaska
That's my next question.
Yeah.
Is the door that flew off, was that here in the United States?
That was here in the States. It was with an Alaska airline airplane. From a 737 is an old airframe, 1960s technology, a 1970s build, right? And then it's been tried and true throughout the years, and one of the safest airplanes that's existed. And now they're trying to extend it or push it out and put some composites and stuff on it, and that's caused some problems. But it's still a safe airplane. They'll figure it out. You're not having to. You shouldn't.
I want airlines to run airlines like an NFL football team.
Yeah.
The best player plays.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with pilots.
The first this or the first that. We should do this. I'm not getting on that plane.
I agree. Crazy. And there were some airlines where I was interviewing with where they were I'll just say they had different hiring criteria than what I was expecting.
Gotcha.
Right. I was up against people with less experience, but were put higher on the hiring chain because
that's complete bullshit.
Yeah. So
you're flying a plane full of people, and you're going to focus on anything other than skill and ability and experience. You are a man.
But it'll all come out in the simulator, and those people have required extra training, and I've experienced some of that in my experience where I was flying with someone who needed extra training, and they get it, and as long as they can pass, they can get out there. But definitely, this is one of those places where, most experience is very
absolutely
very
needed.
So how, as a consumer booking a flight, do I make sure that my airline isn't being dumb as hell in their hiring practices?
I would, do your research on the airline itself and their hiring criteria, right? So, and that's one of the reasons I went with Southwest, because they're very, very adamant about hiring experience and good people, and their training program is very, very focused on you. They make sure that they go low and slow and take their time to make sure that you are completely comfortable and safe in the airplane before they ever allow you to touch the plane. But once you pass that, my first couple flights in the jet were with passengers loaded on board.
Are they really?
Yeah.
So is it all done with the simulations? Is that how the training initially starts?
Right. So you go through your check ride and you go through your training process in the simulators, and it's full motion simulator, man. It is.
I'm sure it feels like the real thing.
It is absolutely the real thing, and they put you in the middle of night at dark with clouds down to the ground. And your engine's on fire, and your hydraulic system doesn't work. And so you're training through all that and showing you what to do in these pressure situations and how to continue to work through the problems, how to use your checklist, use your crew resource management between the two pilots. Somebody's flying, somebody's monitoring, somebody's continuously making sure that the airplane is safe as you're moving through this. And it's amazing. The redundancies and, these airliners have been put through the test on all this stuff. And the other thing that's great is like a 737, and most of these jets fly, you don't realize it, but most of these jets fly 8 to 10 flights a day, right? Mm-hmm. And they do this 365 days a year for
decades,
10 to 15 years, right? Yeah. But then not to mention the airplanes before that were doing it. So there's all kinds of data on what's going to break, when it's going to break, how it's going to break. And so all of those things get replaced before they ever even break, right? So it's required that the maintenance done on them is up to speed or up to time, and they know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And they look at trends of all the engines and everything to make sure that when the trend starts going south, they change the problem before it ever is a problem. So
if you were to book a random flight to Denver, from Austin to Denver, is there an airline that is so deep into the DEI bullshit that you wouldn't fly with them?
I would fly Southwest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's not my plug, but that's my plug. So I would definitely fly with Southwest. Great airline. The other airlines are great too. Like I say, the good thing about it is, most of your captains right now have been sitting in that seat or in either the right seat for a number of years and then moved over to the left seat, and they've got plenty of experience, and so they're kind of watching over everything. But like I say, between the two, you've got an older, set in his ways or his or her ways captain in the left seat, and then in the right seat, you've got this new age, young buck sitting, in the
so
first
left seat's in charge?
Left seat's in charge,
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
So left seat is captain, and then between the two of them, it really balances out, and then it brings everybody to a safe conclusion.
So when you get to Southwest, and if a lot of those pilots are doing several flights a day, how often are you paired with the same co-pilot, or is it just a random pilot that so are you always working with a new pilot next to you, or do they try to do it where the captain and then the first officer, I think that's the term, are paired up a lot together, or does it rotate a lot?
It's completely random.
Okay.
Right? Or you can go through and set your schedules. At Southwest, we have a really good opportunity where we can look at, we can manipulate our schedules, and if we want to fly this trip or trade a trip or move it around, it's kind of like the stock market. We can just trade it around.
Wow, very cool.
Some airlines, they don't have that, and that's why I work here rather than somewhere else. But yeah, it's pretty nice. But
so since going to the commercial airlines from the private sector, private-ish, I guess, are there any airport secrets, stuff behind closed door? I mean, is there anything that you going into the commercial airline like, oh wow, that's interesting how that works? I mean, is there anything that stood out to you that you didn't expect?
I mean, it's amazing how the system is perfected. It really is how everything works like clockwork, and when it's running right. But whenever something goes south, or either the weather goes bad, or there's a runway closure, or there's a mechanical problem, it really sets a domino effect back on everything. And so, the big thing for me is, you hear those people like, my flight's canceled, how long my day's been, and, they're yelling at the gate agent who's literally just sitting there and can't do anything about it. I really have a lot more sympathy for those people, because there's really nothing they can do about it, and yelling at them's not going to do anything. They're doing the best they can. Really, it's you doing your research and looking at what's available or what's going to happen, to the flight if it's delayed, or how long it's going to be delayed. You can you have more control over that than they really do. So try to do your due diligence before you get into those situations, or whenever there's a cancellation or there's a weather delay or something like that. And I would say make sure that you take a look at those conditions and control it, rather than
that makes sense.
Really yelling at
someone who has no control over it anyways.
Control over it.
When I was still traveling a lot for work, I used to always get on the flight apps, and I'd look at the plane coming in. I'd pull up the weather, not really know what I'm looking at, but trying to judge on what's going on.
There's Flight Aware. You can literally type in your flight, and you can see where it is on the map, or where it's going to be. And most of these airline apps now have that to where's my airplane.
And what they should do, though, on those apps is delete the year the plane was built, because Southwest, the amount of 77, 78, 80 planes, like, I don't like seeing when the plane coming in is 1976. I'm like, give me a new plane.
But you'd be surprised. I mean, you say that, but the airplane that I learned how to fly in was built in 1960 or something like that. I've flown in airplanes from the 30s and 40s.
Wow.
And the maintenance that's done on them, and the construction that's been on them, I would rather fly an airplane from the 60s and 70s than I would almost from an airplane that was built last year, because
I guess they probably used to build them better too.
The airplane built last year apparently just had a door fly out, but the airplane from 1970 has 20, 30 years of of flying that or more, that it's been just fine. So
I've always thought it was the smart move to book the first flight out in the morning to avoid delays, because every time I book a post-lunch afternoon, I'm at the airport.
The earlier you can get out, the better. That's the first flight of the day, and that's, it all just dominoes and snowballs from there. If you're trying to take the red eye, that's good luck,
When you're sitting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Everything kind of resets overnight, right? That's when maintenance comes in and fixes things and resets everything and does inspections, and they kind of work through the night, and the maintenance crews, they don't get enough love and support. So hats off to those guys for doing everything that they do, because by the time I get there in the morning at between 5 a.m., 6 a.m. to go fly this flight and load passengers on it, it's ready to go.
Yeah. So when you sit down on a plane and everyone's getting situated and the pilot's doing their deal, and you've got like that 10, 15 minutes before you push back, what are you doing? I know you're doing pre-flight checklist and whatnot, but what is that exactly? So when you show up to the airport, it's your first flight of the day. What are your steps from showing up to the airport to taking the plane, taking off?
Yeah, we have a pre-departure flow for a first flight of the day, depending on what that is, and we check everything. We check circuit breakers, we check lights, we check oil quantities, we check fluid quantities, we check lights, we check switches, we check, everything on the airplane. We check the dates of the database, kind of go through all that stuff on the first flight of the day and then walk around it. And, we're required to walk around the airplane every single time to see if anything's been out of place or subnormal. So
you as the pilot have to physically walk around every flight?
Yeah, one of the pilots has to walk around every single flight.
What's security and parking like for y'all as the pilot? Do y'all get a different parking lot and different security? I
At
assume?
some airports they do, but it's always so far away. It's so far off site. It's not really any better, So
it's just kind of the normal deal like everyone else.
Yeah, I miss flying the private sector because I could literally walk up to the airplane.
That's like the cool factor. You just show up and hop on,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't know how you're doing on time. I'd love to pick your brain about you flying to Africa if we've got the time. I'd love to hear that story.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, I flew to a King Air, actually. That's where I built a bunch of my time right after I had left the oil field and was looking for an aviation job. I started flying King Airs and then started instructing with a friend of mine named Joe Casey out of Jacksonville, Texas, he's an ex-military pilot, very great instructor, and now he's an examiner out there in Jacksonville, Texas. But he ended up getting me a job to where I flew a King Air from Fargo, North Dakota to Libreville, Gabon.
Oh my, we break that down. I know that has to be a crazy story.
It was crazy.
And one tank fuel?
No. We had to stop a bunch. So So I flew up to Fargo, North Dakota, saw an airplane that I'd never been in before, but apparently they were doing cloud seeding operations for the state of Gabon over there. Because apparently they said that global warming was affecting their rain patterns. And so they were going to start cloud seeding over there. Whatever. But so
the cows farting.
Yeah.
They should get it right.
Cow toots, yeah. So I was over there. So the guy called me and was like, hey, it's the middle of the summer. This is an opportunity. Would you want to do it? And I was like, fly a King Air around the world? Yeah. This sounds awesome. I didn't know anything more about it. We talked a little bit, did some research on it, put it together on my maps and whatnot, and then sure enough, went up to Fargo, North Dakota, jumped in the airplane, flew it up to Canada to go to customs, and then went to La Rivière-la-Grange, which is over in kind of the east part of Canada, up in the northeast side there, and then went from there to Iqaluit, which is very north side of Canada, and these are all like bases that
I never
are.
Heard of it. What was it?
Yeah, Iqaluit. So it's
one flight to northeastern Canada and then another one to go even further north.
So basically, just I puddle jumped across to Canada, the small airport, to check in at customs.
Oh, I see. So across the border.
So right across the border, and then from there went to a full tank of gas from there to La Rivière-la-Grange. Well, apparently this airplane had just been serviced and over-serviced on oil. And so whenever I got there, my first flight, I landed, and there's oil leaking out of the hub, right, because it was overfilled. And I was like, oh, great, this is going to delay my flight. So that oil puddle that was under there, I ended up sending it to the mechanic for a little while, and he was like, oh, it was just over-serviced. It's go out of the drain hole. You should be fine. So checked that all out, and then filled up with gas, then flew out to La Rivière-la-Grange, filled up with fuel there, and then went up to Iqaluit. And like I was saying, these are all ex-military bases, right? That whenever in World War II, they were like jumping over with all the supplies and whatnot.
So they were having to use those for fuel to get.
So these are the same airports
okay.
for them as fuel jumps, and that I'm getting to fly on all these. And so I read a book called Fate is the Hunter. I don't know. I recommend everybody read that book who's in aviation, but he talks about a lot of these airports. So I'm up there, like I say, La Rivière-la-Grange to Iqaluit. And it's the middle of the summertime, so I land there at like midnight or like 1 a.m. in the morning, and it's completely light outside.
Wow. And
go to this hotel, sleep for 5 or 6 hours, and then turn around, get back to the airplane, fuel it up with gas again. And then I go to Sonderstorm, which is in Greenland. And then from there, I fill up with gas on this glacier, like literally land in this glacier cutout in this small airport in the middle of nowhere. Fuel up with gas there, and then turn around and fly to, it was beautiful, by the way, fly over these glaciers and all these icebergs and everything over to Reykjavik.
Yeah.
And then at Reykjavik in Iceland, I overnighted there and stayed at the hotel, what's it called, the Blue Lagoon or whatever. And then
our producer Grant got married in Iceland.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's a nice spot. It's beautiful up there, but it was, like I say, it was just light the whole time. Like, It was right in the middle of July. And then got out of there, fueled up with gas again, and then went over to Shannon, Ireland. To Shannon. And then from Shannon, I went to Rennes, France. Rennes, France to Constantine, Algeria.
How do you, when you're going between these countries, how does that work? Are you radioing in, or are you just flying in? Like, how does that?
Yeah,
I mean, there's different languages. I mean, how does that process work?
So everybody in the world has to speak English.
Good.
Well, I mean,
For
rightfully
airlines,
so,
yeah.
right? The Wright
Yeah.
brothers invented aviation,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of the way that they've determined that everybody must read, write, or speak English in all countries and international airports, and so everybody has to. Now, when you go to these airports and they're in native tongue, and whether you're like in France, everybody spoke French until they talked to me, and it was like, to land, and so they've all got their accents, and they know just enough English to tell you how to land in France. I'll just tell you that. And so, but yeah, and then you also have to do, there's customs and paperwork and visas and stuff that all have to come in. But we have a handler that took care of all that. So basically, I sent him my information, and the weeks before, he had made sure that all that information was there and ready to go. And he did weather. He looked at weather for me and everything too. So whenever I landed, I text him, and he would send me all this paperwork and tell me good to go or not, and then I would just go. And then let's see. So we went from Constantine, Algeria, out towards Timbuktu. Yes, it is a real place. Filled up with gas there, and had an interesting experience there where there's Hind helicopters flying around all over the place. And then I had to go pay, a cash tax to some guy with an AK-47 sitting in a little shack on the side of the place over there. So it was kind of weird, right?
Cash.
Yeah, I'm literally laying out
How much did you have to
$100
pay him?
bills. I think I paid him like $800. So which is.
Was this a predetermined amount, or was it?
Yeah, it was a predetermined amount.
Based off what you looked like to him.
Yeah,
How much that AK
it
wanted.
was just like, how much can I get out of this guy? No, it was a predetermined amount. Luckily, it was what we thought it was, or right around it. I think he wanted a little bit more, and
I bet.
I let him have it. So I was just like, that's fine. But then getting out of there, I had to fill up the fuel tanks because my next flight was really long, and I was going to Nigeria, Abuja, Nigeria. And so I had him fill up the main tanks, and then we had a feeder tank on top of the engine nacelles to fill up, to make sure I was at max fuel, so I had max range. And so the guy, the fueler, put the fuel cap on backwards, and I couldn't really see up there, right, from where I was sitting, and so I didn't notice it until I was taking off. And then as I'm taking off, I look over on the side, and I start to see fuel seeping out of the top of the engine nacelle, and I was like, oh great. So I called into the radio to the tower and turn around, and I'm trying to fly as slow as possible coming back, turn around and land, and then get up on the nacelle and get a ladder and put that back on, because if I would have lost that fuel cap, I would have been dead in the water. I would have literally been stuck in Timbuktu with
literally
with nothing to do.
Holy
And
cow.
how am I going to get out? Am I going to get a visa to get out of there? Does anybody fly there? So that was kind of scary. And then I ended up flying to Abuja, Nigeria from there.
Do they stamp your passport every time you land?
Every time you land.
Okay.
Yep. Or, there's some sort of customs that goes through. So I'm flying to Abuja, Nigeria, and this was probably the most interesting flight of the whole thing, because the weather in Abuja, Nigeria is a lot like Houston or Louisiana weather, right? In the summertime. It's almost the exact same. It's that humid tropical weather, and thunderstorms pop up at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're gonna be there. You try to avoid them as much as you can, but it's just what happens. So as I'm flying there, I start to see all these clouds I'm flying over the Sahara Desert while there's a sandstorm too.
Holy cow.
So there is, I literally can't see the ground, and I went up to 25,000 feet in zero visibility all the way up to that point. And
that was just from sand?
Just from sand.
Holy, I didn't
So
realize
that
it would
messed
go
the
that
plane
high.
up?
So you have doors that open in the bottom that allow the sand to flow out the back, so they don't go in and mess up or they don't damage the rotor blades inside the turbine. And so so I've got those open, so I'm low climb the whole time because it loses a little bit of power as it's climbing there, and then you turn around and you get up to I got up to altitude finally high enough to get out of the sandstorm, shut those and go in, and I'm sitting there for like 5 hours at this altitude. Then I get there to Abuja, Nigeria, and I'm 20 minutes away from the airport. Literally, they're calling and telling me you're cleared to land, right? Basically, because there's nobody there. So I was like, all right, this is fine. It's right at dusk. Watch the sun go down. It's starting to get dark. And I notice that there's thunderstorms around, and I'm just trying to dodge them. Well, turned around, and as I'm flying in, the same thunderstorm that was coming through went over the airport, and lightning struck the generators that have all the power to the airport. So the entire airport goes dark. They cancel my landing clearance, and I'm sitting there on 45 minutes of fuel reserve, or I've got about an hour's left of fuel. And so I don't really have charts to go to any other airport.
Yeah, I mean, you're in Africa. It's like
I have one other airport that's an hour away. Well, that landing that I had to do back in Timbuktu, like, took some of that fuel reserve away from that. And so I'm sitting there going like, uh-oh, can I make it to this other airport over here? But also, if I make it to that other airport, is it going to be shut down too? And then I'm like, zero fuel, or what do I do? So I call the controller, and they were like, we should have it up and running in 10, 15 minutes. Oh, God. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there, and I'm circling around in a holding pattern, watching this thunderstorm go away, and then I've just dark spot out there in the middle of the field where this airport is. And so I'm waiting and spinning and going around in circles and circles, and I hear this Lufthansa pilot with the big A350 that's up there, which is it's like a 300 passenger jet, whatever. And he calls in, and he's asking for landing clearance too, and they just explain this whole thing to him. And he's like, well, dang it, I must, how much longer do we have to land, like asking all this stuff. And so we're both sitting there circling around. He's just, 10,000 feet on top of me, and I'm just hanging out here. So we're doing circles for like probably 20, 30 minutes, listening to all the local airplanes come in, hear this, and then they're diverting. Me and him don't have really much other choice. Mm-hmm. And these guys are all going to smaller airports that they have charts for. So we sit there and wait it out. And then finally my low fuel light comes on, which is an amber light that tells you that you've got about 30 minutes left to gas. Like, you need to get on the ground now. And so at this point I declare an emergency and call and ask them to see if they could put a fire truck on the edge of the runway with its lights on, so that I could see where the beginning of the runway is, and point the lights down the runway, down the center line, just so I can see far enough to get my landing lights in a position to where I can see the runway. And they're like, we do not do what I do this. Like, we don't know what you do. What are you talking about? That is crazy talk. Gosh. They're literally telling me this on the radio. And I'm like, hey, I'm out of fuel. I have to land now.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Can you get something down?
Set fires along the freaking runway.
Yeah.
Send the dude out there with the sticks. You know what
anything,
I mean?
Right. Yeah. And so the Lufthansa pilots up there are saying the same thing. He's like, I've got 300 people on board, and we need to land now.
Yeah.
And so they call me at that same moment, and they said they've got half the airport power back, and they're still working on the other half, but they have the instrument landing system is working. And I was like, great. I'll use the instrument landing system to get down to 200 feet, and then I'll land the airplane from there. Can you vector me for the approach? So they start vectoring me, and as I'm vectoring...
So vectoring, they're just like giving you a flight path, basically?
Yeah, so basically they're giving you a heading and an altitude, and you've got to meet that to try to get on this to where you can get close enough in range to this radio transmitter, which will then allow your instruments to guide you down to the runway. And so as they're doing this, another storm pops up, and they vector me into a convective material, like a storm basically, where I'm just like seeing lightning outside and it's raining, and I've got no way to know, because the onboard radar in my airplane it's pretty primitive, right? Mm-hmm. It's not very, and at this point I'm trying not to go anywhere else but directly where he's telling me. So we get on the he vectors me in, and the autopilot finally finds the localizer, which is the horizontal direction. And so that guides me in, and then the glide slope, which is the vertical guidance, picks up, and then the airplane starts descending, and I start getting the airplane ready, and then the storm passes right at about 1,000 feet off the ground. So I'm just in the clouds sitting there, and then turn around and come out, and at 700 feet, I've got the airplane fully configured for landing, and I'm just like got lights on, and I'm just looking. And then right at 500 feet from the ground, I see one light come on. And I was like, all right. And then 2 lights come on. And then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the whole runway just lights up as I'm just about to touch down on the ground. And I touched down and land, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Because the fire trucks or anything wasn't out there because they just didn't know what to do. So one way or another, I was landing right then. So I landed, and then I call the tower on the radio frequency and tell them, to tell the Lufthansa pilot that the lights are back on. And he goes, oh, thank God. Thank you for telling me. Like, we have to land now.
Yeah.
I need an immediate over. So
holy cow.
That was interesting. And, like, I landed, and, of course, my phone doesn't work there, and I've usually been texting my mom and telling her that
I'm okay.
I'm okay because she's a nervous wreck. And so I couldn't tell them until the next day, of course, when I got Wi-Fi at the airport. And so they were all worried about me. Everything was going on. And so that was a interesting experience. And then
were you by yourself the whole time in the plane?
45.3 hours by myself in that airplane, just hanging out.
How many hours did it take?
45.3 hours.
45. So from that part of Africa that you were in, was there anything exciting, or was it pretty smooth sailing to your destination?
Well, the flight was good. So the next morning, I went to bed that night, had myself a Jack and Coke, and kind of, took a load off once I got home, and then had to fly the next day to the final destination, which was Libreville, Gabon, and then jump a flight back to the States. So that next day, they told me, do not take off until you have a departure code or a landing clearance code for Libreville, Gabon. And I was like, okay. So I waited and waited and waited. And finally, they came back with this paperwork, and it had this code on it. And they were like, you're good to go. Everything's good. So I was like, all right. So I filled up with gas and took off and went to Gabon. And then as I'm flying into Gabon, they were like, are you a military aircraft? And I was like, I'm a U.S. aircraft. And they were like, are you military? And I was like, I'm a U.S. aircraft. So apparently the code that I had was mixed up with another flight for the landing code for a military aircraft that I wasn't. And so they allowed me to land, but whenever I got there, the customs agents came over and basically like reprimanded the airplane and tried to get me to stay. And so I ended up talking with the French officials over there because it's a French country, and this girl comes over and she was like, hey, we need to get you to the main terminal right now, or you're gonna have to spend the night here in like jail or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, is that what I should do? She was like, yeah, you just need to get out of here.
Like go take a commercial flight and get out of there?
So she put me in a car, put me in the back, and like drove me over to the terminal where I had to check in with another visa like customs guy as I'm sitting there while they're basically just stalling the other guys. And so I get in the airport and then finally get in and check into my flight there, which was 4 hours before it was supposed to leave. So I'm sweating the whole time until I get on the plane and get out of the country, and it just ended up being a mess. But
so you flew all the way over there and then immediately had to get in a commercial flight to fly back home?
Yep.
Oh, that's brutal.
Luckily they were able to upgrade me to a first class ticket to come home, so I had a place to sleep.
Yeah.
But man, it was a interesting few days there.
So they didn't like that they had mixed up military versus civilian plane. And
the handlers in Nigeria had given me the wrong code. And so I had no way to know that. And I had, whenever I took off. And I even spoke with my handler at that time, and he said, you're good to go.
Wow.
Take off, get out of here. So
you were dropping that plane off?
I was leaving that plane there because the company was just using me as a ferry pilot to get over there. Then they had regular pilots that were going to come over there and do the actual cloud seating.
Gotcha. So you dropped it off, and then you had to get on the first flight out to avoid getting arrested?
Basically, yeah.
Holy cow. What a crazy story.
It was a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't done any of those again, but like I say, I mean, it was a very interesting.
What is it like on our own border right here? Because you could take off, and Air King sounds like it fly to Mexico.
I mean, there's restrictions all over the place right now. Like if you look on the maps and charts, there's temporary flight restrictions, metered all over the southern border right now because they are flying aircraft so much to try to prevent or to at least monitor the situation on the border. I don't know. We've seen some unmarked airplanes that come up and have been in El Paso and literally load up with a busload of people and then fly to the north and Mideast. And I mean, you can watch them on FlightAware and track them and
Wow.
you can see them, and they're chartered
Who's
flights.
paying for that?
I have no idea.
Our
All
tax
I know
dollars?
is that,
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm sure.
And they're just flying them to the Northeast or
Yep.
wherever, get them out of there.
Yep. And
Wow.
we've seen them. Like, I've literally firsthand witnessed an airplane just load up with, and the ramp agents that were over there when I was flying at NetJets would just tell me, like, yeah, they come in here at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and load up and take off, and nobody says anything.
What's if you look up the flight or the tail number, I mean, what is the aircraft? Who is it registered to? I mean,
they're registered to, charter companies, basically, with these big
Like BlackRock?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
well, not
Not that-
BlackRock. Yeah, it's not like contractors, but it's it's like charter companies that fly like
a
sports
NetJet or
teams
someone
and
like that.
stuff like
Yeah.
that around the
Okay.
country. Or if you had just a whole bunch of people that you wanted to fly to Costa Rica or something like that, you could essentially rent a whole airliner to go do that.
Wow.
And
How long has that been happening that you've been aware of?
this was a couple of years ago, like I say, that I knew that it was happening. So, but yeah, I mean, you can look it up. You can watch them at those airports and see where they go. And
I'm sure there's background checks on all those people.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure they pay taxes.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, they're only loading up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the
3 or
morning
4
out of
o'clock,
convenience,
out of
you know?
convenience, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then
They
it's
get
funny
registered
is
to
whenever
vote as they get on the plane.
whenever Ron DeSantis flew those people up to Martha's Vineyard, and you can track that flight too. You can look at it all and just see it for yourself. I mean, do your homework. I mean, it's all
That's
there.
wild.
Why are they flying that way? It needs to be going the other way.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Do it
crazy.
the right way.
I got one last question for you,
Okay.
and we'll probably wrap up. I meant to ask you this earlier, but when I went flying with you in that seaplane or the flying jet ski, we were able just to go land in the lakes. And that to me is just mind-blowing. Will you explain height, like how low can you fly a plane, but then bodies of water are technically runways, so then you can buzz those over if you wanted to? Or how does that work? Or then flying in near the city? Like if you were to go for a joyride around Austin,
Yeah.
like what are the restrictions on it?
So the restrictions are over a populated area, you have to have 1,000 feet vertically and 2,000 feet horizontally. And then over non-populated areas, it's 500 feet vertically. And so you basically just try to keep up with those restrictions unless you're taking off for landing. Taking off and landing, as long as you are in the act of taking off or landing, then basically those restrictions go out the door and you just do whatever you have to do to maintain a safe attitude to make a safe landing or a safe approach. And so, if I'm right over water, I'll try to stay at least 500 feet over boats and stuff like that. Boats always have the right of way. You're the most maneuverable. And, as an airplane, everybody's watching for you, and you probably have the most restricted amount of water that you can use to land on as far as area goes, because you've got to find the perfect spot with no boat wakes. The wind's got to be coming out of the right direction, and you've got to have enough distance on the other side to make sure you get over any obstacles or anything like that, and remain clear of any boats too. So it's all on you as the pilot to make sure that you're safe and out of the way of everybody else. So.
Wow. Water landings are just a whole nother level.
It's amazing though, man.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
It's like
I mean,
just a second ago I was at the airport and now I'm on a boat, like it's so crazy.
Well,
to me.
we're
It's
flying
the
with
most amazing.
Oh, that first time we went flying, we landed, we buzzed the 360 bridge coming down to land right there in the water, and we land, you pop the top, and we're sitting there floating around, and all the boats come over like, what in the hell's going on? Are y'all okay? And I just remember sitting there with you, and you're just like, randomly knew that girl that showed up on the wakeboarding boat, and I'm just sitting there like, what is going on? Like I'm on a flying jet ski sitting on Lake Austin with people coming up, and then we took off and went and landed in Lake Travis. It was a blast. It was
it's
fun,
great.
So.
I mean, it's like I say, it's the most fun experience you can have, and basically, what are the two most fun things for me? Flying airplanes and being on boats. And so that's like the best of both worlds there. But yeah, that day specifically, and we weren't buzzing the 360 bridge.
I don't want to get into
we were on approach.
Okay, on approach. Well, for me as an unexperienced pilot, to me 500 feet above the ground feels like nothing.
I
mean that seriously feels like
really
you were
right on
there,
top of it, right? And it's amazing how your perspective of like your vision and your ability to survey the area diminishes with altitude quickly, right? So from 500 feet up there, we could see all of the boat wakes, we could see all of the ripples in the water, we could see where the boats were, where everything was. But then whenever you land, like, you don't see any of that stuff, right? So it's really deceiving, and you've really got to make sure to survey the area very, very well before you even start your approach to make sure you keep yourself out of trouble. So, but yeah, it's the most amazing experience, and as long as you're in the state of Texas and most any navigable waterway, you can land an airplane just like you can on a boat.
Wow. What about Town Lake? Being right next to downtown, is that 2,000 horizontal distance cancel that out, or because you're landing?
Well, Town Lake has a restriction on a city ordinance to where there's no motorized.
So that's where they get you.
So that kind of gets you there, but also
it's too
small. Well, that's true, but I mean, an airplane, everybody's watching.
Yeah.
And now they have things called ADS-B, which basically is a digital transponder in the aircraft that tells them your airspeed, altitude, everything. It's basically just a tattletale to tell everything about the FAA. It's for traffic avoidance, it's for safety, but like
they're tracking your flights.
They
basically.
know everything. Yeah.
Wow. How interesting. Well, I could sit here and talk planes all day.
Yeah.
But anything else before we wrap up? Any other questions we got for them?
How long are you going to stay with Southwest, you think?
Man, I think this is a career ender for me. Like, I'll just stay right here until I'm 65 and enjoy it and take it out. I've got cousins and family that, have made a career out of it, and they've done very, very well for themselves. And, I like the ability. The best thing about aviation is like about the airline is once I'm done with work, I go home, I'm done. I don't have to send an email. I don't have to take a phone call. I don't have to do that, that conference call or anything like that. It's like when I'm done with work, I'm done with work.
I'm jealous.
I go do my time.
That's great.
So my mind is 100% set on safety of flight when you're in the jet, and then once you're out of the jet, my mind is 100% on home and family. So
that's great.
Yep.
That's a great lifestyle, I think, for anybody out there that's curious and getting into aviation. They definitely should. I think it's a fabulous career choice, ton of fun. And so I guess let's end on that note. I mean, if there's someone listening that's in high school right now and wants to be a pilot, what would be your recommendation? You're starting over again today. What path would you take to get to be a Southwest pilot?
The biggest thing is go immerse yourself in anything aviation. Go to air shows. Go to the airport. Just sit out there and talk to people. You'd be surprised at how many people just sit there and fly their airplanes and want to either help you or show you what they have because they're so proud of this community and what aviation is that they're more than willing to help you get to that point or greater. It's been an amazing ride. It's been an amazing career, and the people is what makes it that way. Like I say, go to your local air show, support your local entity or whatever. If you really want to go, get a flight simulator, like play with that for a little while, like get it in your blood, like feel it out, and then go to your local flight school, and they'll usually have an introductory flight that you can do for less than $100 usually, and take it, see what you think about it. Like just try it. And if it's for you, then dive in head first.
Figure out a way to make it happen.
Figure out a way.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, right? Like every pilot will have a story of how they've overcome adversity and how they weren't just handed their pilot license, right? Something happened to them, something's done, and they've had to figure it out. And so that's a really cool experience and a really cool character trait that all pilots have, and it brings them all together and brings the community to that point. So
that's amazing. Great advice. Thank you again for your time today and coming on.
Thank you guys very well.
Yeah. Do you want to, I don't know if you want people getting a hold of you. If you do, you're welcome to share info.
We can talk about that, or we can share the info in the comments below or whatever.
Yeah.
And they can, if they need some help or want some advice, I'd be happy to help and move somebody to have somebody else get to where I am is, I had to listen to something like this or watch all the videos and talk to other people just the same. So anybody that's interested and willing, I'm willing to help out.
Very cool. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem.
Yeah,
thank you guys. Very good to meet you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.